Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama is convening a White House summit today on reforming the nation's health care system. The Obama administration has asked some 120 lawmakers, insurers, and doctors to attend. Obama finally gave in to a last-minute invite to the House's leading advocate for single-payer universal health care, Democratic Congressmember John Conyers of Michigan. Obama had reportedly refused to invite Conyers, but relented after public outcry. Conyers is expected to be the lone single-payer advocate in attendance. On Wednesday, President Obama announced a plan to overhaul contracting policies in all government departments. Singling out military contracts in Iraq, Obama said the new rule changes would save taxpayers $40 billion a year.
And this wasteful spending has many sources. It comes from investments in unproven technologies. It comes from a lack of oversight. It comes from influence peddling and indefensible no-bid contracts that have cost American taxpayers billions of dollars.
Obama, meanwhile, is facing opposition from members of his own party on a plan to reduce tax deductions for wealthy Americans. The plan would save around $318 billion over 10 years. Under questioning from Senate Finance Committee Chair Max Baucus Wednesday, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner said the Obama administration would consider dropping the proposal. The International Criminal Courts issued a warrant for the arrest of the Sudanese president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Sudan's Darfur region. Bashir is the first sitting head of state to be charged with war crimes. Chief Prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo.
The government of the Sudan is obliged under international law to execute the warrant of arrest on its territory. The court is not calling for someone else to do it. If the government of the Sudan does not execute the warrant of arrest, the UN Security Council will need to ensure compliance.
Sudan has dismissed the warrant as a Western ploy. At the UN, Sudanese Ambassador Abdel Mahmoud Abdel Halim has said his government rejects the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction.
We condemn strongly this verdict. And for us, ICC doesn't exist. We are not bound by its decisions, and we are in no way going to cooperate with it.
Abdel Halim, meanwhile, said the mass killings in Darfur are largely a result of a local conflict over scarce resources.
Regarding a conflict, we have a conflict. We recognize the existence of the conflict, but it has been blown out of proportion. It is a conflict, traditional conflict over meager resources, water, land, like many thousands conflicts in the various corners of the world. So we are not an exception. It has been blown out of proportion to serve agenda and interest of certain countries.
Western human rights groups praised the arrest warrant for Bashir. Richard Dicker of Human Rights Watch said Bashir is guilty of war crimes.
Certainly, it's a momentous day for the International Criminal Court and more broadly the cause of justice and ending impunity for the most serious crimes under law. The mass murder of civilians, the use of rape as a weapon of intimidation or war, the forcible displacement of whole populations on the basis of their ethnicity. So this is a significant, momentous day, and I would say the decision of the judges of the ICC that we heard this morning is really of seismic proportions.
The Sudanese government, meanwhile, carried through on warnings that an arrest warrant would further imperil Sudanese refugees. Within hours of the warrant's announcement, Sudan expelled at least 10 groups that provided aid to more than 1 million displaced people in western Darfur. The groups, including Oxfam, Doctors Without Borders, and CARE International, account for 60% of humanitarian assistance in Darfur. In Israel and the occupied territories, visiting Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's made some mild criticism of Israeli occupation policies in the West Bank and Gaza. Meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, Clinton called Israeli demolitions of Palestinian homes, quote, unhelpful. She also called for a partial lifting of the Israeli blockade of Gaza.
It is clearly a matter of deep concern to those who are directly affected, but the ramifications go far beyond the individuals and the families that have received the notices you referenced. So yes, this will be taken up with the Israeli government. We have obviously expressed concerns about the border crossings. We want humanitarian aid to get into Gaza in sufficient amounts to be able to alleviate the suffering of the people in Gaza.
Earlier today, at least 3 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip. Israel says it targeted militants who fired at occupying Israeli troops across the Gaza border. In Iraq, at least 10 people have been killed and more than 40 wounded in a bombing near the city of Hilla. The attack targeted a busy cattle market. UN General Assembly President Miguel Descoto Brockman is calling for an independent probe into human rights violations as a result of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. On Tuesday, Descoto appeared before the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva.
Independent experts estimate that over 1 million Iraqis have lost their lives as a direct result of the illegal invasion of their country. The various UN human rights monitors have prepared report after report documenting the unending litany of violations from crimes of war, rights of children and women, social rights, collective punishment and treatment of prisoners of war, and illegal detention of civilians. This must be addressed to bring an end to the scandalous present impunity.
In Afghanistan, 3 Canadian troops have been killed in a roadside bombing near Kandahar. The attack came as 3 civilian contractors for a U.S. company were injured in a car bombing at Bagram, the main U.S. airbase in Afghanistan. In other Afghan news, an independent election commission has rejected President Hamid Karzai's attempt to move up national elections to April. The commission has set August 20th as Election Day. Opposition leaders have accused Karzai of trying to rush the vote to help secure his re-election. Meanwhile, Democratic Congressmember John Murtha of Pennsylvania is predicting it'll take some 600,000 troops to defeat Afghan insurgents. Murtha is the influential chair of the House Armed Services Committee. The 600,000 figure is more than 7 times the peak number of NATO troops expected in Afghanistan this summer. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's in Brussels today for talks on the Afghan occupation with NATO allies. Former Bush administration aides Harriet Miers and Karl Rove have agreed to testify on the firing of 9 U.S. attorneys 3 years ago. The agreement ends a long-running dispute over the reach of executive power to shield administration officials from testifying. Attorneys for former President George W. Bush, the House of Representatives, and the Obama administration brokered the deal. Rove and Miers will provide depositions and sworn public testimony, but they won't be asked about their discussions with President Bush or other Bush administration officials. Despite the conditions, House Judiciary Committee Chair John Conyers declared victory, saying, quote, "We've finally broken through the Bush administration's claims of absolute immunity. This is a victory for the separation of powers and congressional oversight," he said. In Venezuela, President Hugo Chavez has seized a local subsidiary of the American food giant Cargill in a dispute over the market cost of rice. Chavez says Cargill and other companies are evading price controls and selling rice at inflated costs. Chavez is also threatening to nationalize Venezuela's largest private company, Polar, in the rice dispute. New figures show the U.S. private sector lost 697,000 jobs last month. The services sector was the hardest hit, shedding 359,000 workers. A new study has found an increased rate of illegal firings when workplaces vote on joining unions. The Center for Economic and Policy Research says more than a fourth of union representation elections held this decade have been marred with an illegal firing of a pro-union worker. Pro-union workers were fired in 26% of union election campaigns, up from 16% in the last half of the 1990s. Labor unions are currently seeking passage passage of the Employee Free Choice Act, which would make it easier for workers to join unions. President Obama said this week he supports the measure. Here in New York, State Attorney General Andrew Cuomo has subpoenaed several top Merrill Lynch executives who were each paid more than $10 million in cash and stock last year. Overall, Merrill Lynch handed out over $3 billion in bonuses just before the company sold to Bank of America in a government-backed deal. The bonuses were handed out despite a $27.6 billion company loss on the year. Cuomo's investigating whether the payments violated securities laws. In other New York news, the state assembly's approved a measure to partially reform the draconian Rockefeller drug laws and give judges more discretion in sentencing. The